Stay tuned for a very special episode of Fire Call. Fire Call, the fire safety show with Division Chief Jim Sideras. Hi, my name is Division Chief Jim Sideras, and you're watching Fire Call. This month it's going to be all about the biggest fire in Sioux Falls. Now, when we go back in time 15 years ago, you look behind me, Sioux Falls was totally different. The building behind me didn't exist. It used to be a large block building built out of hand-cut granite, built in 1904. At about 2:40 in the morning on May 25th, 1991, this had been burning for hours. Crews came in. We had over 100 firefighters fighting this fire that had been burning long before we even got the call. Flames were going up, reports of 100 feet in the air, and people could see this fire from as far away as 10 to 15 miles away. We had over 100 firefighters who fought this fire for 72 hours. And that's all we're going to talk about. We're going to talk to the owner of the building, Bob Hansen, who co-owns the building, and he owned another building next door to it. We're going to talk to Mike Hall, who was a lead inspector on that call, but now is a city director for Central Services. And we're going to talk to a number of different firefighters, from some of the first crews on to some of the first firefighter that went off a ladder into this building. So sit back, take a load off your feet, step in our world, the world of Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. Well, I'm with Jeff Winters. Jeff Winters now is a captain, but 15 years ago, Jeff Winters and I were firefighters stationed at Fire Station 2, or Action Station 2 as it's better known. And Jeff and I were on Truck 2 at that time, or Engine 2. And what do you remember about going to that call, Jeff? I mean, that's quite a while ago. I know it's kind of hazy back then.
Well, I remember when we were headed down there, you made a couple comments to me. We could smell the smoke as soon as we left the station, so we knew we had a good fire going on. And when we got there, we knew we had a good fire going on because there was a lot of fire everywhere.
There was. How do you remember this going? Who was the first one in the building?
We were the first ones in the building.
So.
We weren't the first ones on scene, but we were the first ones to make entry. I remember you chopping a hole in the door, and I was on the tip.
That's a sworn, unsolicited testimonial?
Sworn.
Okay.
So we were the first ones in.
Captain Durban was our
Captain Durban, and you and myself entered. We did the first floor. We went in the first office, did a right-hand search pattern. And I remember Captain Durban yelling, "Come look at this, come look at this." And as we poked our heads out around the corner, we saw what appeared to be a rollover coming down the hallway. It just kind of lights up at the ceiling, and it rolled all the way down through the hallway.
Yep.
And then we got up and we put most of that fire out. And then I believe what happened next was you ran low on air.
I think one of us did.
Yeah, and I'm thinking we had to send you out, which left Durban and myself in there. And then when the other crews were up on the second floor, they discovered that the second floor had collapsed. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing that happened was the air horns were going off on all the trucks to get out.
Because that's our signal. That's our signal to exit the building. As
emergency exit the building as quickly as possible, leave the hose line behind, and run. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did. We exited, we left the hose line behind, and we headed for the door as fast as we could go. And
then after that, we turned into pretty much a defensive operation.
That is correct.
What did you do during that time when it was defensive?
Well, after you got hurt and left.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
And left us with 3 persons on our cruise. We ended up on top of Harold's.
Mm-hmm. Which would be the southernmost building where the fire stopped, basically.
Right next to the State Theater. Mm-hmm. And we fought some fire up there for a while, and the roof got pretty spongy. And so
when it's a spongy roof, what's that indicate?
That indicates that you probably got some fire going underneath you, and there's a lot of extra weight with all that water on top of that roof, and it was getting pretty soggy, and they determined we needed to get off the roof. So what do? They put us in underneath that roof so we could tear down ceilings inside of Harold's, and we had plenty of fire up inside the floor.
What were you under? Do you remember what you were under?
I was under a extremely large air conditioning unit at the time, and that's what we saw up there. We saw some green smoke coming from the air conditioning unit, which generally means that you got fire underneath that, and so it's burning around it. And when we got inside, there was a false ceiling, and then there was a plaster ceiling above that.
Really?
And by the time we had actually made entry into that space, it was full of fire. And so we just kept going in and out, and then they eventually got it stopped at the State Theater with the firewall.
Right. Well, 15 years ago when we pulled up to this fire, we knew it was going to be kind of a long job, but we thought we could actually save the building. And one of the jobs that my crew had was to actually go into the building. And this was the original axe. I actually bought it when it went on sale for surplus because don't have any more wooden handled axes anymore. But we used this axe to break down that door. There was a door that was sitting here, and that's where we made access to. And Jeff Winters and I and our captain, Captain Durban, actually went into that building, went up the stairs, and when we were inside this building, we could actually see the fire rolling across our heads. You could feel the heat, you could hear the crackling and the popping all around you, and we knew that we were going to be in for a long haul and we probably wouldn't be able to get much further into the building. And at that time we had our air packs, our SCBA, used to be made out of steel. They weren't the lightweight models that we had. My belt went off and we had to exit this building, so we came out that same door and then we set up defensive perimeters. Basically, we tried to hold that building and not lose the rest of the block or the building right across the street, because as the embers were flying up in the air, they'd be landing across downtown, and we also had to worry about the radiated heat, the heat that was the waves of heat on these other buildings. So that's how we started the night, and we pretty much stayed here till the next morning. During this time I ended up getting hurt. We'll talk about that a little bit. And crews were here for 72 hours fighting this fire all night long, and this was filled with people down here watching us fight this fire. So it was kind of a unique part of history for Sioux Falls. I'm with Jerry Black, and Jerry Black 15 years ago was a lieutenant. Right now he's a captain. Actually he's filling in for a battalion chief spot. And Jerry, you've been here for, we figured this out once, 28
years.
All right. It helped to pre-plan on that one, didn't it?
Did the math ahead of time.
Well, going back now to the Hanson building, what station, you remember what station you were working out of? What was your job back then?
Yeah, I was riding on the aerial ladder. I believe it was out of Station 7.
Okay, way up north.
Yep.
You remember when you got the call, what you were thinking?
It seemed like it was the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. But we'd heard a lot of radio traffic on our way down to the building, so we knew something was cooking down there.
And then when you got there, now I remember the Jerry Black story, the infamous Jerry Black story about setting up the ladder, and we had the main ladder down there in the corner, I believe.
Yep.
And then you went up the ladder.
Yep.
And what happened, Jerry?
We set the ladder up on the corner of, must have been 10th and Phillips there.
Right across from Nervous.
Yep, right in that intersection. I went up the aerial ladder. There was a window that was open up there.
What floor? Third?
That
fourth?
was on the top floor, third floor, I believe it was. Yep. I was able to go inside. It was clear inside of that room, so I stepped inside of that room, went into the hallway, and there was all kinds of heat and smoke and fire there. So I quickly returned to the aerial
and bailed out.
And went back. Yes. Yep. And we had crews up on top of the State Theater. There's a firewall there, and they were able to stop it from extending into the State Theater. But there was a time when we thought the whole block was going to go. It was just, there was just so much fire and so hard to get at.
Now we're with Joel Van Eckeren. Joel's been on the department for 20 years, so he's a fairly new guy back then. Now he's a driver, driving Truck 3. Now tell us what you remember. Where were you at? What truck were you assigned to?
I was stationed at Station 7 on Engine 7.
Okay.
And when we got down there, we were assigned to do an interior attack on the third floor. Engine 1 had already done an interior attack, and they got backed out.
So you were going to go off, you can do your interior attack off a ladder?
No.
Okay.
We were going to take hand lines in and do an interior attack, try and find the seat of the fire.
Okay. And what happened, Joel?
When we went in, it was Lieutenant Greg Anderson, who's retired now, and myself. I think that was it. And when we got up to the third floor, our hose lines, they got tangled up. They got caught down on the bottom floor. So we went back down to untangle them, get them free.
Sure.
And when we went back up to where we were at, the floor was burned through.
Really?
It was gone. Yep.
So you would have probably ended up in the basement if you would have stayed there.
The floor and the roof were gone.
All caved in.
Yep.
So getting your hose caught was actually
saved our life.
And isn't that funny the way things work out?
Yep.
As we were down here fighting this fire, we had a lot of concerns. One was the building across the street from us. We had set up a lot of lines here to keep that building cool, to keep the fire from traveling over between embers and radiated heat. And this is where I had my big claim to fame. One of these 2.5-inch lines was charged, and no one was on the end of it. And it was, you know, flapping around like a big snake, and we're trained, all firefighters are trained that if that happens, to keep people from getting hurt, you jump on the line, crawl down the end of it, and kind of wrestle it down. Well, when I did that, of all things, it was a small tumble, but the seam of my coat compressed my nerve in my arm. So I couldn't move my hands for a couple months. And they were thinking at one time, Jim, you're not going to be a firefighter any longer. What else can you know how to do? And that's why I ended up going back to school and going back to college. And that's why I'm going to encourage people, hey, if you want to be a firefighter, if you want to do anything, get a good education, because that you can always fall back on that. So the several months that I was off work on rehab, I started taking college classes, and hey, look at me today. I'm with Denny Matthews, and Denny Matthews 15 years ago was at Station 9. Today he's at Station 8 with one of the USAR teams. And Denny was one of the crews that came in for that fire. Now, Denny, you were one of the first crews that went into that building. What happened when you went in?
Oh, they sent us in the east door first. There was 4 or 5 of us, something like that. We went in with 2 hand lines and went to
those were like
inch and 3/4 line. Well, they were inch and a half then.
Inch and a half lines then.
And we went in with 2. Went to the second story entryway, and there was a big long hallway there. And the fire was just rolling back and forth on the ceiling, and you could chase it down to one end and then it would come right back, and we didn't have near enough water with those 2 lines.
How was the visibility at that time?
Terrible.
You were crawling on the floor basically?
Yeah. We crawled up the steps, and we were at the 2nd floor landing, at the top of the landing. And there was, we were there maybe 5 minutes or so, and there was a granite curtain board along the steps, and I looked down, and there was flame coming up from behind all this granite curtain board. So I hollered at Jim Fink, the captain, and I said, well, what do you think of this? And he says, I think we should leave. And so basically we just abandoned those hand lines there.
And when that fire was coming out at you, would it just be sucked back in, or was
it just kept, it was just, I don't know, it was just like water on a lake or something. It was just going back and forth, back and forth. We couldn't put it out.
How hot was it?
It was hot, really hot. So we left there, went back down. Then they wanted us to try and get in through a knick-knack shop on the corner, and we chopped the front door out of there. It was solid smoke, and there was just a huge vortex of fresh air that went in.
After you broke the door in?
After we broke the door in, and the smoke disappeared, and it just let all the fresh air in. And so Captain Fink decided we weren't going in there, and we went. Which is good. Decision. So then we went to the next door, and there was nothing in there. That was a real small store. And then next to that was the west side entry. So we went up to the landing there, and there was, I don't know what it was for. There was a little window there about this big, and we looked in there, and it was just all solid flame in there. So we set a deluge gun up there, big water cannon gun. We set that up, got the lines to that, and then we broke the window out and just let that shoot in there. And they said go to the State Theater. We just kept going farther and farther to the south, and there was nothing in the State Theater. It was
the State Theater is where the big firewalls were between the State Theater and the basement.
It was granite 2 foot thick, you know, so it wasn't getting there. So then that basement and everything was all clear there. Then they sent us up onto the roof of the. By that time, they'd ordered everybody out. It was all outside attack then. And then we basically spent the rest of the day on the ceiling, or on the roof of the State Theater with 2.5-inch lines.
The State Theater is where they drew the line that we're going to protect the State Theater.
Yeah, this is it. This is where we got to stop it. And that they did not have adjoining roofs. They were a little bit off. So we knew they weren't the same roof line. Plus, there's a big granite wall coming up in between there, and that basically stopped it.
One of my most vivid memories on the department is on top of that aerial ladder, overlooking this building which took up about 1/4 of a block, which was just walls and a big fire pit. And we were lobbing water into the pit, and it just was doing no good. And I was up on top of that ladder as the sun was coming up over the bridge there in the morning. And just one of my most vivid memories.
Oh, really? Yeah. No, I can picture that now almost.
Yep. It was amazing.
And then you were there pretty much the whole next day?
Yep. And then the crews stayed over. Most of the crews stayed over the next day. And additional people came in. I think it involved just about everybody on the department at that time.
So you think that was one of your more memorable times on Sioux Falls Fire Rescue?
Oh, without a doubt. It was just a terrible fire.
And then now, when did you finally leave? The next day, or were you there for?
We stayed on duty until about, I believe it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We went back to the station at about 9 o'clock in the morning and filled in at Station 2 with a tanker because we had everything else down at the Hanson Fire.
So you were quite a bit.
Yes, it was a very long day.
So were you ever nervous or worried anytime you were there?
Pretty much the whole time. That's a big building. That's a lot of fire, and a lot of things can happen in big structures like that.
Now we're going to talk to Bob Hanson. Bob Hanson's the co-owner of the Hanson building where we're at, and also of Harold's Photo Shop. Harold's Photo Shop was a photography shop right behind me. It lined up right next to the State Theater, and this is where that fire line was. So we're going to talk to Bob and get his perspective of finding out about this 5-alarm fire that was engulfing his building in downtown Sioux Falls.
Our old building had been there since the early 1900s. It was originally named the Paulton Building, built by the Paulton family. My uncle and father started a camera store there in 1938, and about 25, 30 years later, the building became available. It was in fairly poor condition by that time. So we purchased the building and changed the name to the Hanson Building. When we got the building, the top 2 floors had been completely abandoned. The pipes had been cut off. We had pigeons and the whole deal up on 2nd and 3rd floor. First floor was in pretty good shape because that was all retail and was occupied. We started a multi-year project of completely rehabbing the top 2 floors back to office space, and had just about finished the entire project when the fire started. We had tenants all through 2nd floor, and most of 3rd floor was all rented with refurbished offices. I got a call in the middle of the night from my cousin who said we had a fire going downtown. So I jumped in my car. I live a couple of miles away, and when I turned the corner onto 12th Street, I knew we were in trouble because I could see the lights from the flames and tons of smoke coming out of the building. Got downtown, and just about like everyone else who was down there at that time, we stood around and watched the firefighters battle the blaze. It, of course, looked bad right away with the flames coming out of all the windows. The discussion through the night with various people was that maybe we could save some of the building, but there was, on the 1st floor, there were a lot of drop ceilings from modernizing the building back from the very high original ceilings down to a more modern 10 or 12 foot ceiling. And by the time the flames moved through all of those ceiling cavities down towards down the whole length of the half a block or whatever it is long building, it became pretty obvious that the whole top was going to come off the building and there wouldn't be anything left.
We're here with Mike Hall, who's the Director of Central Services for the City of Sioux Falls. Mike was an inspector at the time, 15 long years ago. And Mike, I'm just going to ask you some questions about how this all went. How long from when the fire started till you were notified?
Well, with any fire inspectors are on call, and typically the chief officer would request a fire inspector on any major fire. And this one, going in, prompted a call for a fire investigator to come out.
And how long did you spend investigating? First, where'd you start at when you got there? Did you start interviewing firefighters, or how does the process go?
Well, when I arrived, I called for some additional support as well. It was obvious that we were going to have quite a task on our hands because this fire was unique in the respect that firefighters were denied entry. They went in, and after a relatively short period of time, the emergency horns were activated to call firefighters to evacuate the building. And you know, in the history of Sioux Falls fire rescue, that doesn't happen very often.
No, we're pretty.
So people were already scratching their heads, wondering how come our crews weren't able to penetrate and attack the fire. What we found and discovered early on is that this building, like many buildings downtown, these older buildings, during the energy conservation years, false ceilings were installed, and
Sure.
we found 2 or 3 false ceilings in that building.
You mean one on top of the other in series, you mean?
Yes, exactly. They kept lowering what were originally probably 16 to 20 foot ceilings in these downtown buildings, and so they had multiple false ceilings in them. We know through our investigation that the fire broke out in an area that was concealed and had an opportunity to spread before it penetrated the exterior of the building, and that's when it would have first been noticed. And I believe that penetration was on the south side of the building, which would have been away from street traffic.
Sure, in that alleyway. And then as you start searching through this building, how do you find out what the cause is? I mean, as an inspector, back then, wasn't that long ago, is there any word, do you start at the bottom, start at the top, or just sift right through in the middle?
Well, this fire was fun to work in the respect that we had comprised quite a team. We coupled our investigation with the State Fire Marshal's office. We had a private insurance investigator who was working with us that we allowed onto our team. We had police officers, and we had an agent from alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So we had quite a challenge just going in. We brought in some heavy equipment and cranes, and first and foremost was just the safety of the adjacent buildings and the public, because we had some walls that were kind of teetering, and then the call was that those had to come in. So we had the safety of the building before we could even begin thinking about getting into the area. But once we did, then the tedious task of getting the debris removed, again, several floors that we had to get out of the way so we could get in and look at the area. We found an area of origin, and from that point, it got a little gray, I should say, because we had a little differing of opinion between the fire officials and our insurance investigator. We unfortunately had to settle with the final cause of the fire being undetermined.
Okay.
We went as far as identifying
that no inspector likes to say.
Well, yeah, you'd like to solve every mystery out there, but the insurance company felt that they had found a device, a motor that they thought had overheated and created the source of the ignition, and we simply weren't comfortable agreeing with his summation of that. But we did agree on the area of origin, and we also, what's critical here is that we go into every fire investigation with the assumption that this could be an intentionally set fire or an arson, and there was nothing to indicate that there was anything suspicious of nature, and all avenues of concern of it being an arson were ruled out.
Now, 15 years ago, this is a spot, the State Theater. We knew we had big firewalls there, and this is where over 100 firefighters made the stand to save the rest of the block and probably downtown Sioux Falls. We held here. This is where a lot of guys put a lot of effort into keeping this fire from spreading. Now, when we think about all the memories of everyone that was down here, my last memory is this fire is raging, and one of the firefighters comes up to me, and we're just kind of sitting out here and throwing water, and he said, "Look at all the guys in the tuxedos." There were about a dozen guys out here, guys probably in their 50s and 60s, staying there in tuxedos at 3 in the morning. Well, it turns out they were a bunch of Masons and Shriners that were up in Del Rapids. They saw the fire. They're all from Sioux Falls. They came down here, and I looked at them, and I was laughing, and then I realized one of them was my dad. And my dad's there one of the few times he ever saw me doing the job I just love to do. So that was one thing I always thought of when I'm down here. So when you recap this whole thing, this was one of the biggest fires in Sioux Falls, 5-alarm fire, 72 hours of nonstop combat. And when we think about firefighting, we have to think this isn't a job, like I said before, we're not selling widgets at Wally World. This is a job where you have to depend on the people next to you. The guys like Jerry Black, Jeff Winters, Denny Matthews, all these people come together, and if there's nothing else you know about, you can trust those people with your life, because you might have to. And it can happen anytime, any place, just like it did 15 years ago. So in closing, I want to say, we come down here to Sioux Falls, we walk down here, we don't think of all the memories that some of us had down here. My name is Division Chief Jim Sideras, and you've been watching Fire Call.